Hello and welcome to our very final Saturday Sketch Club of this series. For those of you who don't know, my name is Will Iron and I work here at the Royal Academy of Art, and I am on site in our Claw Learning Centre and I'm joined by artist Emyr Williams. Today you're going to need pencil, paper and a rubber. As ever, please do share your work with us throughout the session, and you can do this using the hashtag #RASketchClub on Twitter or Instagram, or by uploading images to the Facebook group Saturday Sketch Club. We will have a chance at the end to have a look at some of your works. Use the chat, say hello. If you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A function. That's either for me or for Amir. We will try and get back to as many of those as possible. So today's artist tutor is Emyr Williams. Emyr is a fantastic abstract painter and a brilliant teacher, and I've been working with him here at the Royal Academy for quite a few years now.
A few years, yeah.
And in fact, we will actually have an on-site, in-person weekend course run by Emyr in October. They are going to be released very shortly. So if you would like to know more and keep in touch on all of our courses and classes, you can sign up to our newsletter, which should be going in the chat now or at some point in very shortly. So, Emyr, thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to kick us off and tell us what we're doing today?
Okay, rather than do an introduction, I thought we would just start. So could you get your pencils at the ready, please? And make sure you've got a piece of paper in front of you. What I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you a very short story. And during that story, I'm going to put my thumb up periodically. Every time I put my thumb up, what I'd like you to do is to make a 2 or 3 second decision on making some marks on a piece of paper. It could be just a scribble, a squiggle, some dots, lines, hatches, cross hatches. It doesn't really matter. Just only take a few seconds over it and keep an eye out for my thumb. As soon as you see that, do that, okay? Right, so imagine it's 1888 and you are Vincent van Gogh, and you're in the south of France, you've returned from Paris, and you're living in a town called Arles. It's a hot summer's day, and you decide you want to go out and make some drawings. Now, drawing was obviously a lot cheaper to make than a painting. Van Gogh didn't have much money. He was supported a lot by his brother Theo. So he used to make a lot of drawings, and he would make them in a very similar way, that he would use a simple pot of ink, a reed pen, which he'd make himself from a piece of cane, which he would sharpen with his penknife, and he'd have his paper. So here you are, and you've gone out to make these drawings. You're on the outskirts of town, and you've got the fields in front of you, and what you're looking at is an expanse of grasses, hedgerows, different wild flowers, the foot of the Alps in the distance, maybe the odd cypress tree, and you've got perhaps the edge of the town. And behind all of this, you've got the most intense blue sky, just a complete sheet of blue sky, not a cloud in sight. Now, drawing a sky is a particularly tricky thing for an artist, and what they would often do is perhaps put a tree in there to break it up a bit, or even some clouds, or change the viewpoint. But Van Gogh didn't really do that. What he did was to take it head on. He would look straight at it, and he came up with the most remarkable series of dots, dashes, scribbles, just pure invention to create a sense of not just the sky, but the atmosphere of the place. When you look at a great Van Gogh drawing, it's not really a depiction of the outskirts of Arles, in this case. It's as if he's captured electromagnetic energy itself. It pulsates with rhythm and life. So hopefully, during that little story, you've got a series of marks on your paper. Hopefully they're diverse, and think of these as ingredients that we're going to use to make a drawing with, plus any others that you can come up with as you're making the drawing. Now, before we start the drawing, I will do the introduction now, really, and that is, this session is all about drawing into the abstract. So we're going to gradually move into abstract ways of working as the morning takes shape. The word abstract is interesting because I think sometimes it's often used even in a pejorative sense. People will say, you know, oh, I don't like that, it's a bit abstract, or it's abstract, it's just all those circles and squares. And if you think about that last term, a circle and a square are both geometric shapes. So you could say, really, that's not really very abstract. And consequently, the opposite of that, something like realistic, is used as a compliment. If you do a really convincing rendering of someone, say a portrait, someone will say, oh, that's fantastic, it's really realistic. And again, that word could do with a bit of interrogation. Because if you think about it, if you've made this fantastic portrait of someone in pencil, and you think that's really realistic, is it really? Because when did you last see someone that was grey and flat? So maybe we need a better term than realistic. Maybe something like believable or convincing, or nuanced or subtle. So we're talking about the qualities of the drawing rather than having to make the drawing justify itself for being something else. So I thought, hopefully by the end of the morning, I set myself a challenge of trying to convince you that actually to work in the abstract is to work with reality. And it really is something that could be more real than when you're making what we could call a rendered drawing. That is an approximation in tone or line of something that you can see, whether it's a person, a place, or an object. So the exercises that I've got in mind for you all address that issue. What is real, what is abstract? And also, hopefully, when you're making these drawings, another thing will happen, and that is your confidence to draw anything will increase. Because what I really hope from this session is that it's not really about putting drawings on the wall and saying, that's a finished drawing, I'm really proud of that. If that happens, that's fantastic. It's really about what you do next and how drawing can help you and support you in any other activity, whether it's just as a pastime, to spend the time of day, whether it's just to learn things, or whether it's to make finished works of art. It's a wonderful thing. In this world of technology, a simple pencil and a piece of paper is still one of the most sophisticated tools we've got, because the key bit in that is you. So you're putting that imagination and invention into your drawings. So the activities are designed to get you to think inventively and imaginatively. One word of warning, I find this is always a good thing to say. If ever you're doing something that requires a bit of invention, it can be a little nerve-wracking because you don't think what you're doing is any good, perhaps. My advice is always the same, and I do this myself, and that is kind of try and keep your ego out of it. And what I mean by that is don't put pressure on yourself to make a fantastic drawing. Just keep it simple, do it well, and don't worry about it. And I think that's the best way to approach any drawing. And then the sort of real qualities of the drawing will emerge gradually. It's a bit like acting. You deliver a line, but then you stay in character and you respond to the person who's delivering the line back. So when you're making a drawing, you make the marks, but you switch on to what the marks are actually telling you and what you can do about it, and then move with those. And I think a good drawing, if you find yourself in the middle of it, you'll find yourself saying, this needs rather than this looks like, because then you've really got into the reality of the drawing. Okay, so the first challenge I thought we'd look at would be to question this idea of what makes a good drawing. And traditionally, we're all taught that if you have an object in front of you, a classic still life, whether it's an apple or just a simple object, the light comes from one particular side. You've got to put in shading. You've got to get the degrees of contrast in there to make a convincing illusion of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional piece of paper. And that's what this is all about, really. How do you translate 3 dimensions into 2? That's always been the biggest challenge. If you think about what Van Gogh did, he did it with dots, dashes, marks and scribbles, and he produced this amazingly believable, palpable sense of reality without it being a stylized or systematic rendered approach. So that's what I'd like us to have a little look at first. So I thought I'd pick the simplest, most innocuous of things that we could make our drawings of. And starting with a simple piece of paper, which is obviously 2-dimensional, and the easiest way to turn this into 3 is just to kind of scrunch it up. So if you just scrunched up a piece of paper in any shape or form you want, you could refold it back out, you could let it rest and settle, you could do this a few times, until you've got a three-dimensional form, which has obviously got quite a complex array of different planes and shadows and contours, and it's quite rich to be able to draw from and very challenging, even though it is what in all cases is just a simple piece of litter, we could say. So we're going to work from this scrunched up piece of paper, and that is going to be the first drawing task. Now, if you haven't got any paper like this, you could work from an example that we've got here for you. And I'm going to also make a few drawings alongside you, but I'm not going to try and finish them all because I don't want you looking at my drawings. I want you really to develop your own. So I think the first challenge is to work from this piece of paper. But what I'd like you to do is look at those marks that you made when I was telling the story about the Van Gogh drawing in the landscape, and use those. Think of those as your ingredients. Look at what you've got here, and rather than jumping into a way of drawing that perhaps you're familiar with, or even perhaps you think you should use, see if you can come up with another way of responding to this three-dimensional form, using all that array of inventive marks. And I'd like to give you about 5 minutes to do that drawing task now, please. So I'm going to just place this to one side, and I will start a drawing as well.
And as Amir said, you can obviously either work from your own scrunched up piece of paper, or you can work from what is on the screen here. We've got 5 minutes starting now.
So I'm just trying to sort of move my pencil around here, and I'm feeling the weight of it rather than taking it for granted. And also, I'm not going to sort of stay in one part for too long. I'm going to move around the whole thing. And I'm going to vary the weights. I know sometimes it's good to kind of feel your way into a drawing. Don't worry about that. If you want to press a lot harder on this occasion, do so. If you want to press a lot lighter, again, do that. What starts to happen is the actual marks themselves develop a new reality for you to look at. So you've got a bit of a dialogue going on here, one between the form you're drawing, which is obviously the scrunched up piece of paper, and two, between the unfolding reality of your own drawing of that scrunched up piece of paper. And that in itself is the challenge. How do you select from what you see into what you make? So I'm trying different ways of holding the pencil. I'm trying different ways of making marks and just enjoying what we could say is the randomness of the marks, but actually that's not strictly true because you're trying to be very, very particular and yet open to discover new ways of making marks. If you see something a bit darker, there are ways of making a darker tone. Obviously, there's pressure if you're using a pencil, but you can also look at what's called clustering, and that is putting marks near one another, and the nearer those marks are, the darker the tone will be. So there are different ways of creating tonal contrast than traditional rendering skills. And there's no obligation for you to draw in a particular way. So I'm just going to keep on doing this. I'll move around it. And I'm going to stop my drawing at that point and let you finish your drawing for a few moments.
And about halfway through.
I'm using a 4B pencil today, and I know that the HB scale is something that maybe has been discussed before. If you Google it, you'll find the French words haut and bas, meaning high and low. And high, what that relates to is the amount of binder in the graphite. So the more binder, the harder the graphite, the lighter the mark. the less binder, the softer the graphite, the darker the mark. So it goes down the B scale when it gets softer, and it goes up the H scale when it gets harder, and HB being the midpoint. But I'd also heard that the Czech company, Koh-i-Noor, who were very famous for making pencils, they claimed that the HB scale was actually to do with them. And the H comes from their founder's name, Hartmut, and the B from the place that their factory was, which was Budějovice. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. So the HB, they say, was their one. Now, they were very famous for making the first yellow pencil, and which I think was the archetypal pencil in the early days. So maybe someone could let us know which is the true HB scale. I don't know. Okay, so we've got a few moments left. And as I said, just relax, make some marks. Don't worry about it being a particular style or even having a completeness. Just allow the pencil, just brush the cobwebs off this morning and just allow the pencil to kind of find its own way around the paper.
Got 30 seconds left.
You may find the odd sort of stress point where you want to put in some darker marks at this point, just to kind of lift a few areas.
And we're at time.
Great. Now, so hopefully that was a kind of quick start and a loosener. And I want to keep that momentum of invention going. So I'm going to start another drawing in a few moments, only this time I'd like you to focus on a specific quality in the drawing. Again, we're going to work from the same form. If you want to turn it around, you can do if you've got one at home, or you could still look at the one on the screen and perhaps maybe start from a different point. Maybe start in the middle or the left-hand side if you started on the right, or if you started at the top, start at the bottom. So you're trying a different approach, even to a still image. So the artist Constable, which the RA's got a great show coming up later in the year, I believe,
Yep.
Was a fantastic draftsman and often went out into the landscape around Suffolk to make drawings, which he used as kind of reconnaissance work, really, which he then brought back in and made up into paintings. And one of the things that he was really brilliant at was the perception of distance. So what Constable could do was, just by changing the pressure and the direction of a pencil mark, he could suggest something that was 3 or 4 miles away to something that was maybe 20 or 30 feet away. And that maybe they were only a heartbeat next to one another on the paper. But just in that sort of slight press or release of the pencil, it's almost like breathing on the paper and allowing the pencil mark itself to have an energy and a characteristic. He could control distance. Now, if you think about how we've evolved as a species, we scan the horizons to look for danger, or we'll scrutinize something that we've picked up to see, could I eat that? And that sort of ability to move in a fluid field of vision is something that we all have, perhaps are in danger in the screen-based world of maybe losing a bit. So being aware of a fluid field of vision, I think, is something that is really key to making good art. Now, on your drawings, I'm just going to turn my paper over. I'm going to work on the back. Only this time, what I'd like you to do is to concentrate on the pressures. So when you're making a drawing now, don't rush into just immediately pressing for the darker areas. What I'd like you to do is to feel the weight of the pencil, slow down the drawing, and this time concentrate on how, when you look at that form, you've got really sharp contrasts at times between dark and light areas because of the changes of angle. And try and respond to that in a very subtle way. So it's a slower drawing, only this time you are really concentrating on changing the actual pressure and the stress and even the direction of the line itself. This may mean that you don't make a complete drawing. You just make maybe a part of a drawing.
And we've got 7 minutes for this, yes?
Yes, a little bit longer for this one. So I'm going to very slowly look at how the pressure can be released or increased depending on the area. And there's almost a slightly hypnotic quality to drawing a bit slower. And try and move your eye across the form at the same speed as you're moving the pencil. Don't worry about accuracy as such if things are slightly in the wrong position. It's not really about that. Remember, it's about the unfolding reality of this drawing in front of you. You don't have to imitate. You just have to respond. And if you're in one position on the form, you could come off that and go to another part entirely and pick up the drawing there, almost to create another island of activity, which maybe could be connected later, or maybe not. So all the while I'm increasing and decreasing the pressure on the pencil. It becomes a real workout for your eyes. The other thing I think that's nice about working with quite an innocuous form like this, the expectations don't get in the way. If you think about working from a face, for example, the expectation is high to A, make it look human, and B, make it look lifelike. So that puts a bit of a pressure which can be stifling. Whereas when you've got something that is as throwaway as a piece of scrunched up paper, then the expectations have been removed really. And it allows you to relax a bit and just discover drawing in a more innocent way. And just the pleasure of actually the physical activity of moving the graphite over the paper.
So about halfway through on this one.
So at this point I can see I'm not going to finish a complete form. So what I'm looking at is how I could relate these two areas without maybe letting them touch. I'm intrigued by that possibility that I could leave an active gap which becomes a space somewhere by closing the distance down a bit, but not actually touching it. So all the while I'm thinking more this drawing needs rather than this looks like, and keeping up that switch of pressure between dark to light. The drawing kind of redefines itself repeatedly as you make it. And that's also an interesting thing to do. Rather than thinking I've got a definite end point in mind, it's quite free.
About 40 seconds or so left on this one.
There's no need to rush to get to the end of this drawing. Just let those seconds unfold. And whatever is the state of the drawing at that point is the state of the drawing. The danger is that you'll think, I must finish it, I must finish it. But don't think that. Just think, I'm going to just keep drawing at the same change of pressure and pace.
And if people are working from their own, presumably they can come back to it.
Absolutely, yes.
And that is time on that exercise.
Okay. So, so that was Constable and Pressures. And what was nice about that, I think, was the almost meditative quality that you can put into a drawing. And drawings can have those functions. You don't have to just say, this is how I draw, this is how I'm going to draw. It's up to you. You can find different ways of drawing and also different reasons for drawing. But what's important is to allow yourself a freedom. It should be uninhibited when you draw. It's a conversation with yourself. And there's something very intimate and rewarding about making a good drawing. Because I think it's to do with how you manage time. If you think about how we see so many images or pictures of things which capture time instantaneously, whereas a drawing, you work with time, over time, and it develops and you go with time. So that's a very different approach to trying to capture something. Really, a good drawing should release the space rather than capture the space and trap it. So that's a challenge, to try and find ways to make the drawing feel free, make the drawing have a strength about it, but also an intimacy and a personality. So to do that, you've got to put it in there. You've got to really feel that drawing. So what I thought we'd do now is maybe change the pace. We've gone from slow. Now on a new piece of paper, I'd like to go a bit faster. And for this one, I thought about Picasso, because he's possibly the greatest scribbler of all time. There was a really astonishing exhibition of his works in the RA last year, which was quite humbling to look at. The variety of works was mind-boggling, but also the variety of approaches. And the other thing that struck me more than anything, he simply didn't let up the intensity, even with the most innocuous of scribbles. It was never a lazy scribble. He was always switched on to the drawing, and there was a real electricity in the work. So this time we're going to continue from the piece of paper, only this we're going to work at a bit of a pace. So I'd like you to look at some sort of scribbling and continuous line drawing. I don't want you to take your pencil off the paper. I want you to draw intensely for as long as you can. I think we've got about
5 minutes?
About 5 minutes on this one. So this is quite a challenge, actually, to keep this pace up. If it does get a bit exhausting, then take a little break, but try and come back to it at pace. Try not to weigh things up too much. Work very quickly and spontaneously from what you can see. I would advise you start in the middle on this particular drawing and then work your way outwards. You can move around it, but keep the pressure idea that we developed in the last one, but this time let the marks be freer and quicker and let the pencil almost have a life of its own, a bit more crazy perhaps. So we're just going to move, and I'm changing pressure at the same time. I have no idea how this drawing is going to shape up, but I'm just going to move it around. And I'm starting to notice things a little more about the form, the kind of spine of it, the vertical as well. I think the artist Matisse said, I never threw a crazy curve. All my lines are against the plumb line. So being aware of the verticality of it is important. And I'm just trying to move my pencil now. If I find I'm making too many similar kinds of marks, I can break it up. And one of the nice things about making a drawing, it sort of audits your thinking. You can see it taking shape. So it's all there in front of you. And this one will be a lot more worked up and a lot more busy as a drawing. So we're looking at scribbles. And again, try and respond as much as you can. So it's a real dialogue between the form you're drawing and the actual drawing you're making. Don't be scared if one area really gets overworked. Put the boot into the drawing and see what happens.
That's about halfway through, 2.5 minutes left on this one.
It can be quite tiring, but we're going to keep going. Perhaps there should be an Olympic event in drawing against the clock.
The Drawing Olympics.
The
Art Olympics.
That's it, the Art Olympics. We could do that. So this is the abstract event. I am going to keep drawing because I don't think it's fair to ask you lot to keep drawing, and I don't on this one actually. That's wimping out, so I'm not going to do that.
About 30 seconds left.
I would encourage you to actually actively court the idea of overworking this drawing, so you really take it to a breaking point. And in fact, see how far you really can go.
And that is time.
Right. Worn out by that.
Well
actually.
done.
I think
Well done, everyone.
Drop of water. Okay. So hopefully you've got a very, very intense drawing, and you may need to sharpen a pencil or take another pencil for the next activity. This one, I thought, rather than start a new drawing, we would actually go back into this drawing and work on it. Now, you'd think that maybe you couldn't do much more on this because it's very densely toned. But maybe what we could do at this point is to think about using an eraser and actually to rub out and to use the eraser as a way of actively drawing in reverse. Now, the American artists, the abstract expressionists, did a lot of eraser drawings with sometimes one artist sharing another drawing with them, and then that artist would try and rub it out. And Lee Krasner, who was married to Jackson Pollock, she was a fantastic artist. She made some wonderful drawings which used an eraser as an active way of making marks. So what I thought we could do was, using this heavily worked tonal drawing with loads of scribbles and loads of busy marks on it, is to go back into it, only this time starting the drawing with the eraser, to actually make decisions about where lighter areas are or where lines are, not just, again, to try and imitate the rendered illusion of a drawing, but actually to try and create a new reality of marks, but in reverse. So we're making rubbed out marks, positive marks, rather than negative marks. So I'm going to demonstrate.
We've got about 5 minutes to do some rubbering, some rubber drawing. And just if anybody didn't see in the chat, there are some examples of Lee Krasner's rubber works, if you wanted to have a look at that. So yes, 5 minutes for this one.
So you can use the rubber and the pencil. So first of all, try and get some sort of dominant marks in there.
What would you say to people who don't want to rub out what they've just created?
Well, that's a really good point. I think that we're talking about fear then. I think the problem there is the fear. So how do you deal with the fear of spoiling a drawing? The one thing I'd say is to just reassure yourself it's only a piece of graphite on a piece of paper. So don't worry about it. You could always make another one. Honestly, you could. And to sharpen my point even further, the great French artist Gustave Courbet used to say that a masterpiece must be painted more than once, which is quite a sort of chilling remark because of what that implies, that you shouldn't really be slave to chance. You should be able to control your work. And if you've done something fantastic once, that's great, but could you do it again? And that's a real challenge. Now, that comment haunted Matisse for his whole life. And there's a great book that you can buy, which is put together by his assistant, Madame Lydia Delactreskaya. And what she did, she took photographs of different stages of paintings and drawings over a period of time that painting or drawing was taking shape. And the book is called With Apparent Ease, because Matisse was always worried about the fact that although his drawings had what could be classed as maybe a superficial lightness of touch to them, what people weren't realizing was the amount of work and industry that went in to actually making those drawings. So his assistant took photos at different stages, and you can see in the book there'd maybe be about 10 or 12 black and white images because color photography hadn't been invented yet. And you will see a painting taking shape. Now, sometimes it could just be maybe something moved that's quite subtle. It could be one particular color changing from a green to a red. Other times it could be a whole scale wiping out of practically the whole painting or the drawing and a starting again. And there's an unforgettable sequence of drawings of the life model in that book, which you would think were all different drawings. Each one looks completely complete in its own right and is a beautiful drawing. And then when you look at it, you realize it's the stages of the same drawing. And he was completely fearless to be able to wipe out an entire drawing, because charcoal will allow you to do that, and start it again. And he took that confidence then into his paintings. Now, he used oil paint. So what would happen is his assistant would take a quick picture of the work at the end of the day. A couple of
minutes left on this, by the way.
And she would then get a cloth and some oil or terps rather, and wipe out the entire painting or the part that he wanted to rework. And again, he would keep on going until he reached a sort of condensation of his senses, and he actually reached what he felt was the essential in the work. And sometimes that meant getting rid of what he thought were the nicer bits, which is always a killer actually to do when you work really hard on a particular area and you think, oh, it doesn't really work in the whole, I've got to get rid of that. So what I'd say is, don't be scared of it. It's only pencil and paper. What's the worst that can happen? So I'm using the eraser here.
Less than a minute on this one as well. And someone was saying that they've been using colour instead of rubbers for this. So adding in instead.
That's fantastic. That's an interesting one. I often draw with those twistables. I find they're great.
Somebody here is saying, talking about great books, yours on abstract painting and abstraction has been very useful too. So
send that person a check, whoever that was. Thank you very much.
And that we'll also put a link into Emyr's book, which is fantastic, in that chat as well. And we're coming up to about the last 10 seconds. And time. Brilliant. Amir, thank you so much. That was fantastic. We're going to take a really quick break now, so feel free to continue working on your drawings. Now is also a really great time to share them, again, using that hashtag RA Sketch Club on Twitter or Instagram or in the Facebook group. And again, if you would like to stay in touch with news on upcoming events, courses and classes, including an on-site class with Amir in October, then do sign up to our newsletter and we will keep you in the loop on all things courses and classes. Time for sort of a couple of questions or so. And so obviously, one thing is we're thinking about abstract forms. You've spoken a bit about this. Do you start with a sort of still life when you do your abstract works?
That's a good question. No, I don't. The very first abstract painting I made, I can remember it. It was in 1986, and it was started from a street scene in my hometown one Christmas. I made a small ink drawing, and then eventually, gradually took it forward into an abstract painting, and that was the first time I'd really sort of abstracted. I'd say probably at least maybe 2 years after that, or maybe no, a year after that, I'd stopped abstracting. I'd stopped working from things. And that's, it's just a different way of working. What I tend to focus on now is just the color is usually the start point if I'm painting.
Yeah.
And the actual, what's called the facture of the paint. So the word texture means how you perceive a surface, whereas facture is the actual surface itself. So this is where we get the word manufacture from.
Right.
So manufactus, handmade. So it's the actual quality of the reality of the paint. Now, I also make a lot of drawings, but I draw in different ways. I'll draw from observation. I've got small children and older children, so I'll draw them when they sit still. I'll draw landscapes, but I'll also make transcriptions of art that I like. I do that a lot. And then I'll make what I call improvised drawing.
Yeah.
So when I'll just get my sketch pad out and I'll just be, basically, I think of it as kind of warming up the oven, just sort of getting started. And also things can happen in that drawing. You get a sense of scale.
Yeah.
So personally, I don't work from a particular form when I'm making my own paintings, but I do work from different things as separate activities. I think it all feeds in as well.
Absolutely, and I think what the beauty of these sketch clubs is giving different people different tools to see what works for them. And it's worked in many ways. Here is a question from Brittany who asks, "Do you throw away your own work?"
That's quite an interesting point, actually, because I've got to say yes on that one. That I was clearing out a few things the other day, and I threw away about 100 paintings, old works, which I've got mixed feelings about, but I had to just do a declutter. I had to clear out the area.
Sorry if I'm bringing back any sort of traumatic experiences.
No, I mean, I think really it's about a lot of the works were kind of experimental things, and they were in the moment things that I didn't really need. So I do throw away things. I am guilty of hoarding things. I keep the most random things as well. There's always that optimism, isn't there? I think that this is going to come in handy at some point. But after about 20 years or so, I'm pretty brutal.
Okay,
that's gone.
Great. I think we should probably get back stuck in. Do you want to tell us our next exercise? Right.
So I thought we'd up the ante a bit now and start to look at the principle of moving into a more abstract way of thinking about the work. Still, this is probably going to be the last exercise from this particular form itself. Still working from this form of the scrunched up paper. I've got 3 words I'd like you to look at, that I'd like you to deal with specifically when you're making this drawing. The first one is contour, dealing with the contours. So you've got the edges and contours. I'll come back to that actually, because there's also a couple of ways of thinking about that. The second one is the area, because that's the other thing you've got, is the unfolding area and shapes and forms of the undulating form itself. So contour and area. But the third one is a bit more esoteric. I thought the air. How would you draw the air? Because if you think about it, it's not flat. And I can put my finger into that area, into different depths. So it is a 3-dimensional form that traps air. So how would you make marks that correspond to the reality of nothingness? How could you do that? How could you make something that's not visible in your drawing? I don't have an answer for that. It's just a question. And on that point, I think a good drawing actually raises more questions than gives answers, perhaps. So those are your 3 prompts: contour, area, and air. Now, you've been developing a sort of visual vocabulary this morning so far, so don't suddenly change that. Build the momentum from what you've been doing earlier. And the word contour is interesting because you could think of the contour from a single viewpoint, or you could imagine the contours being all over it, because each point of contour is where the form stops and the air begins. So you've got to make a decision about a contour that tells you that it's no longer air, but it's form. So that's a kind of, it sounds a bit confusing, but those are the 3 prompts: contour, area, and air. How would you draw the air? Now, for this, the only tip I would give you is that the reality of this drawing on the paper is now absolutely center stage, that the form is just a prompt, but you've got to be more aware of what you're producing on your paper as you respond to that form. So contour, area, and air.
So looking at time for about 9 minutes.
We'll give them about, I'll give them 8.
8, perfect. 8 minutes for this one.
Okay. Going back to Constable, this is interesting because this makes you think about distance. At what point am I making this mark? At the moment, I'm putting a line that corresponds to the deeper part, but now I'm starting to think, how would I draw something that was really above it? Would I come across it in some way to suggest that it's not part of the form? So would the marks I'm making contradict the drawing that I'm trying to make as well? So I've got marks now that are sensitive to the form and also contradictory to the form, which gives it a real problem to work out.
Somebody's asking how is there a difference between air and negative space, and how?
Yes, I'd say that, again, think of negative space as being literally unmarked space on the paper. And think of air as being active space that you can put marks into. So going back to that thing about the gap and the space, you can make a mark to fill a gap. You can make space, you can create air by putting things in rather than leaving things out. A great Michelangelo drawing, if you look at it, it's got this amazing quality of a human being in 3-dimensional space. It's not sort of slick, it's just incredibly well observed, and every single millimeter of a line like a contour is alive with electricity, and you sense the air touching the body. Now, he actually didn't like being called a genius, even though he was fated in his own time. And one of the reasons for that was, he said, if they only knew the amount of work that had gone into making his work so great. So I'm looking at contour and I'm looking at area, and then there's a sudden drop into that pocket of space there. So I'm looking at maybe more curved marks to suggest that pocket of space. Rather than picking up on the illusion of the form, I just need a different way of responding to it. This is a very peculiar drawing to what I've done so far, and quite a kind of intrigued by that. He also destroyed a lot of his work as well, Michelangelo, which really is having his cake and eat it then, isn't it? Because he's sort of saying, if only they knew, but he never tells us how much work, because we can't see it, because he destroyed so much of it.
Well, and a boon for forgers if you wanted to go down that route.
But he's a difficult one to forge.
Yes, true. We're about halfway through on this one.
In fact, on the sort of subject of what you draw from, I think it's fantastic to make transcriptions of people like him. paintings, drawings, sculptures, anything really, you really get under the skin of the work and connect with it in a much more meaningful way when you draw it. You don't have to make a forger's copy, just actually making a response.
Yeah.
I think is a really, really valid activity. When I'm doing that, I sometimes set myself a 20-minute deadline. I've got to produce a drawing working from another artist's work that I like. Usually I get a book or a postcard, and I'm going to give myself 20 minutes to make a drawing. And whatever I produce in 20 minutes, that's it, done. The great Spanish artist, Goya, he used to say that he could capture the essence of a figure, of a man falling from a third-story window before the man hit the ground. Now, he never actually put that to the test, but as far as I know. But it was the principle of getting to the essential and responding to that in an immediate way, and then building the drawing from that, or the painting. So remember to do that air. Could be a contradiction in marks. And then remember pressures from earlier exercise. And also remember maybe scribbles and the invention of the very first series of marks that you were making.
About a minute left.
Again, at some point, think, what does this drawing need? It's difficult to say, does it look like? Because we're trying to find a new way of accessing the reality of it. I think if the drawing is really honest and you've just had a real good go at it, it will be convincing. And I think that's the best quality in a drawing. Does it convince? So sometimes I'm letting the pencil just kind of float over the paper, and other times I'm just bringing it down to earth and pressing a little hard.
And that is time.
Right, so the next exercise, the one thing that we haven't really dealt with are edges. So far, all we've been dealing with is the edges of the paper. Now, Matisse was famous for saying, when you start a drawing, the first line is the fifth, because the other four lines would be the sides of the paper. So you're always relating the line to the edge. So with that in mind, we're going to abandon this form now and put that to one side. And we're going to use the last drawing you've made. So the drawing that dealt with the line, the contour, the area, and the air, we're going to use that as our new subject matter. And we're going to make a drawing in response to that. Only what I'd like you to do at this point is to start by drawing a definite box around to create a shape on your paper. Now, you could have started your drawing as a portrait shape or a landscape one. It doesn't really matter. But you've now got these edges that are actively in your field of vision, and you've got your drawing, which is your new subject matter, which you need to work from. So this is all about selection. You can maintain the quality of line, contour, area, and air, or you can improvise with some new marks. But what I want you to be acutely aware of is how each time you start a particular area, you relate it to what's in the vicinity. So look at these edges and ask yourself, how does this line, so if I'm starting picking up on a dominant line, how does it relate to the side edge or the top edge?
We're at 4 minutes for this one.
Yeah. So sometimes the lines can just come to touch, but not quite. Other times maybe they could go out the side. So all the time you are relating line to line, mark to mark. Picasso sometimes would have problems with edges. And I wonder if it's because of how he was taught when he was young, in a very traditional way, which was to put something in the middle and then just fill up around the edge. So the key thing was right in the middle. He once saw a still life of Matisse which had a crop on it where an apple or something was out the side of the painting, and he said it really set his teeth on edge. He liked to keep everything kind of floating in the middle, which weirdly is a kind of quite a traditional way of making a drawing. So let's question that. When you are making this drawing, you're now creating new pockets of space that could be independent of the form themselves. And that is air as well as space. So you could improvise for something in these areas. So the reality of the drawing is the whole rectangle rather than a form inside the rectangle. Now that's another way of looking at drawing entirely.
Halfway through this one, do you have a sort of favourite paper that you use for sketching?
I tend to buy sketchbooks in bulk, and they're usually about 170 grams weight. So I look at the weight. Unless I'm doing something that requires watercolor or something,
yeah,
and then I'll get a heavier one. But usually, just simple, cheap and cheerful, decent sketchbook. I do like Stabilo pencils, I've discovered.
A minute left on your edges.
So I'm moving around the whole form.
And that is time. Fab.
Okay. So now we've got a series of drawings that really are autonomous works, you could argue, that we've moved away from the form, and possibly there are no vestiges of the form left. You're just looking at the reality of that drawing on the paper. Is that abstract? That's a good question. The next challenge is a memory-based one. So what I'd like you to do is either turn that piece of paper over or turn it to one side and start with another drawing. But I want you to have maybe one last look at it before you do this. Commit a few essential things to memory and use those things as the prompts to start the next drawing. You don't have to, it's not a challenge as to how well you can recreate that. It's just to try and see what are the strongest things that leave the most lasting memory for you from this particular drawing. So what qualities would you think of as being essential? So think of Goya and the Falling Man. What exactly is the most essential thing that you can see? Give yourself a few moments to absorb that drawing. And once you've done that, start a new drawing. Also start with that rectangle. Okay, so start by drawing your rectangle. And remember what those key moments in that drawing were. You can look at it one more time if you want. Think about it. Once you've started with those key points, then see where that will take you as a new reality. So have a good look.
This is the last one you did, right?
Yeah.
And you have 4 minutes for this one. And this is memory.
Memory.
No cheating.
No.
We trust you all implicitly.
Again, let the unfolding reality of the drawing, once you've committed to the essentials as you see them, there's maybe a new set of problems to solve now. I'm actually going to bring the rubber in back at this point, and I'm going to remove some bits.
About halfway.
If you've got a very dominant line, sometimes you can make it more dominant to actually make it less conspicuous. Strangely enough, actually going further than you think. Sometimes I think that if something's going well, make it better. If it's going badly, make it worse. And actually, you tend to end up at the same point.
And that is time.
Right. I think we've got time for one more drawing.
One more drawing, absolutely.
Only a short one.
A short one.
Okay, so I think what we'll do on this one is put every drawing that you've done away from your eyes. And we're just going to spend 2 minutes on a drawing. But I want this to be a definitive drawing that sort of sums up your journey, not the form as such, but just where you are now. So this moment in time, these 2 minutes, this drawing is your 2 minutes of drawing time. And you're basing it, or rather not basing it, you're producing it as a result of all the other drawing that you've been doing this morning. So just think of it as 2 minutes of free drawing activity that you think sort of sums up your journey. So you're thinking about all the different kinds of approaches that you've looked at and letting that come through in the drawing. Again, I'm going to start with a rectangle. So I'm going to make a definite shape to start with. And 2 minutes starting now.
Brilliant. Eden is asking if you have any tips on what to do if your drawing keeps trying to form recognisable non-abstract forms.
Turn it upside down.
Turn it upside down.
Turn it the other way around. Work it from
Perfect.
another point of view. That is usually a good old one to do. Yes, that's a really good question because you're fighting against prior knowledge there. It's quite useful to turn a drawing upside down, actually, to see it from another viewpoint, because sometimes maybe you stress an area too much and you can't think what is out of balance in it. And when you turn it around, you suddenly see that. And that could be the nicest area, unfortunately.
1 minute left. And of course, you can always revisit any of these later on, and all of the Saturday Sketch Clubs are available on YouTube and on the RA website. This one will go up early next week.
Absolutely. Any of these approaches you can just use, and maybe you can come up with a lot more of your own. But it's about just trusting your drawing, allowing it to develop its own personality without putting the pressure on it to be like anything.
And that is time. Brilliant. Amir, thank you so much. That was a fantastic session. So we now have the time to have a look at some of your pieces. So once we get those up on the screen, Amir, you should have a clicker with you, and so we could have a flick through some of those elements.
Okay, so this is Liz. I really like, the thing I like about this is the changes of direction and also a very, very convincing sense of the spaces that have been observed. In that right-hand drawing there, the way that the weights of line change, that's a very subtle drawing. I also like the way it's been placed on the paper. It's got a sort of informality, which I'm enjoying. Teresa's one has got a nice use of, we could say chiaroscuro, I suppose. There's a sort of very strong dark light contrast and some very, very inventive, improvised, almost dancing forms, I think, on that one I quite like. There's a good sense of movement in that drawing, or those drawings. So Trisha's one has got, I particularly like that middle one where there's a kind of tumbling sense of form with, again, the different stresses and weights of line. And Sharon one's here. Quite nice to see two drawings side by side that are clearly related, but each have their own identity. There's a kind of a summation of marks in the right-hand one, which I'm guessing was made after the one on the left, which seems to be picking out the key things and giving a sense of that three-dimensional form. That's really nice. Shirley's one. So there's a really nice one here where the drawings ghost in and out in the middle. So you can really see a sense of the active space between them. And that's a really good example of how a gap has been kind of subtly filled to create a space. So you suddenly, that whole piece of paper becomes active space. It's not over-laboured as well, so that's a really nice one. Very strong drawing by Claire, which has got some nice use of tone. So there's nice variety of dark and light shadows, and a nice sort of richer drawing that follows it with a sort of stronger commitment to maybe more inventive marks. So that's really nice as well. So this one has got a whole range of approaches on different coloured papers. So that's marvellous to see. Actually, the white on the black is really good. Using the complementary colours of orange and blue, that's really nice, especially the invention in that one. That's some lovely bits of invention in that, and the line seems really alive. I think my favourite is the one in the centre of the screen where it looks like a very dark pencil line, where there's a real sense of invention and great dynamic in the angles. So M. Chan, you really understand angles very well. I think that's really come alive, really dynamic drawing. Congratulations. And this one, I'm guessing born 7 years after me. Well done. Well done on that. There's some lovely drawings there. I really like the informality of just using the book, making the drawings, moving from one to the other, and the economy of line is really impressive. In that last drawing in the sequence, everything is in that drawing, and it's very simply put together. You've really got a great sense of scale in that one, I think, which I think is very, very nice to see. So this one by Charles, this is a lovely bit of invention, kind of scribbles, marks. This drawing is just bursting with energy, feels really alive, almost like a Bonnard drawing. I think one of his great landscape drawings when he's just recording the scene around his house or just outside his window. And there's this lovely kind of sort of looping, scribbly mark making, which kind of really gives the page and the drawing a real sense of energy. And this is nice to see because Candice has shown how you started, so and the responses in different media as well, using chalks. Again, you get a real sense of the fact there's a selection that's going on. It's not trying to slavishly copy the form, but it's really trying to pick out the key things. Lovely sequence of 4 from Afsana. This is really enjoy these drawings. 4 distinctive drawings. You can tell they're related, but they have great integrity about them. Actually, convincing. That's the word I'm after. They really convince me that they've got a real kind of 3-dimensional quality to them without being traditionally illusionistic. So that's a real celebration of this morning, I think, to see that, because I completely believe those drawings, but they seem very personal in the way that they've been put together, the use of line, tone, mark, space. It's all in there. Great.
Probably got time for one more.
And, okay, so this one is using colour. This is a riot of colour, which is marvellous to see. She's really, really confident use of line, directional line, which sets up momentum. In the second drawing, I like the fact that there's a change of diagonal. So we move predominantly from left diagonally up to right. And there's a few horizontal lines, but then suddenly there's a check in the top left-hand corner with the reds going the opposite way. I think that's crucial, that simple little bit of corner in the top left-hand there with the reds on the dark. Which I think, possibly is a response to the air, but also is a real response to what that drawing needed. So congratulations on that as well. And the one on the left, I think, is a lovely series of inventive, busy marks held together by strong structural diagonals all the way down the left-hand side. Again, going from top to bottom gives it a real scale. So there's a real sort of sense of a monumentality about the drawing. That drawing could be small or it could be really, really large. So that's a great one as well.
Brilliant. Thank you to everybody who sent their work in, and indeed, thank you so much to everybody who sent their work in over the last 8 weeks. It has honestly been such a pleasure to have you drawing along with us over the last series. And again, thank you for all of your warmth and your enthusiasm. It has really been such a pleasure. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank you to everybody who has made these possible. It has taken a huge amount of work from so many various different teams. So a real personal thank you from me to everybody who's worked so tirelessly to make these happen. We will be announcing new events in the near future. So if you do want to hear from us and you haven't already, do sign up to our newsletter. You can do that in the link. As you know, all of these events are free. If you've enjoyed the series, though, and you would like to donate, there is a link at the bottom of the screen and also coming up in the chat as well. Anything is much appreciated. As I've said before, they are all available to rewatch on YouTube and on the RA website. And I think for the last time, this series just takes me to say thank you to all of you for joining. And Amir, thank you for a wonderful session.
Thank you.
And we really hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye. Thank you.